How do you feel about breaking rules? About going against what the authorities in your life tell you to do? A majority of people basically comply with whatever it is that they're told to do. There was an experiment done back in I think it was the 60s, by Dr. Milgram at Stanford University, and what he wanted to do was determine whether somebody who otherwise seemed very normal, and this was specifically having to do with the post-Nuremberg trial, it was the post-Nuremberg trial era, and apparently there was a doctor that was helping them. He was a German citizen, and he would do experiments for the Nazis that just seemed outrageous. And he ended up getting the death sentence as a result of it. But when people looked at his life, his actual home life and family life and social connections, he led a very normal person's life. He didn't seem like he was some whacked out madman. But the experiments that he had done on people just showed a lack of empathy, and it showed that something weird was going on here. So Milgram wanted to see if just being under an authority figure was enough to make otherwise normal people act in ways that otherwise their conscience would prevent them from acting. And what he did was hired some actors to play as if they were part of the experiment that was a compliance actually it was a test. They pitched it as a test to see if a person who got zapped with some pain, if it would help them remember, help their memory. And so what the way the experiment worked is you'd have two people enter into a room, and they'd get briefed on what the experiment was all about, and they would draw straws to see which one would go behind the wall where they'd be strapped to a chair that would administer the electric pulses to the person. And then the other person would be on the other side of the wall, and there would be a one-way mirror or one-way piece of glass, so that the person on the other side that was in the strapped into the chair couldn't see the person administering the shocks, but the person administering the shocks could see the inside and see the person in the chair. So what would happen is they would have the person who was by the shock machine speak over a microphone so that the person inside the room could hear it, who was strapped to the chair. And they would say, okay, we're going to tell you a list of words, and then what we're going to do is see if you can remember them. And if you can't remember them, then you're going to get a little bit of a zap, and we'll see if that helps stimulate your memory. So now when they did this, when they brought the two people in and had them draw straws, the actor always got the short straw, which meant that that person would end up going and sitting in the chair. But the other person was actually the one being evaluated to see their response, because this wasn't about memorization. This wasn't a memory test. It was actually a compliance study. And so that person thought that the other person was part of the study, but it turns out that that person in the chair was not. It was an actor. And so it was only this one person who was administering the shock who was the subject of the experiment. So what would happen is they would be told from behind, or they would be told, okay, now go ahead and give the words to the person. And then after you give the words to the person, then we're going to, you're going to go one by one through each of the words. And for each word that they miss, you need to, every time they miss a word, you need to give them a zap. And after the first one, then you got to crank it up to the next level and give them a zap. And you keep doing that until you get through the whole list to the very end. And so they said, do you understand? And it was like, yeah, they understood. And apparently, supposedly at the beginning, people filled out little forms saying, yes, we understand what this is all about, and so forth. Anyway, what ended up happening in this Milgram experiment is that the people who were told to go through the list they would start saying the words, and after they had told the person once, okay, they went through the list. Then when the person, maybe the first word was book, and the person remembered, they said book, and it's like, okay, that's good. Next word, and then they ask the person, what's the next word? And if he says chair and it's actually table, then he'd get a zap. And so then they'd zap him and go, ow, and then they'd go to the next one. Anyway, they keep doing this, and what they found is that over 60% of the people would continue to go through the experiment and zap the person up, all the way up to the maximum potential that was shown on the dial. And the dial even said, dangerous. And in some cases, the person behind the wall in the chair said, hey, I have a heart condition. You can't do this anymore. You got to stop. You got to stop. And still the person, because they were being told through I think a microphone, they were hearing it like on a speaker or something, please continue. And so they said over 60% complied and continued. And then what they did is they tried the experiment again with a bunch of different people, but they had a person inside the room with the guy that had the shocking machine, and that person, and they had the person inside the room with him with a lab coat on, and then that person would say, please proceed, the test must continue. And so every time the person that was zapping would do the zap, and if they got reluctant, they would say, please continue, the test must go on. And they would keep doing it, and they got over 90% compliance when there was somebody in a lab coat, an authority figure in the room, encouraging them to go on. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, the result of this whole Milgram experiment was the determination that it did not matter what the socioeconomic status of the person was, whether they were male or female, whether they were, what religion they were, except there's one exception for that. It didn't matter what culture, what race. Across all these different dimensions, they found that pretty much everybody responded to the same degree. In other words, the percentages came out insignificantly different. They were all pretty much the same across all of the different nationalities, races, genders, etc. The only difference was there was a statistically significant increase in the compliance of people who were Catholic. So there is something quite interesting, and I'll leave that with as it is. But the main point of the whole experiment was that people who are generally good, compassionate people who have apparently normal values and morals, when put in a situation where they have an authority figure telling them to do something that goes against their own moral code, even when there's another human being who's crying out, stop, stop, I can't take it anymore, they will continue to administer shock that could even be lethal. In fact, in several instances, they had the person, the actor inside, once they got up to a certain point, the person would stop responding as if that person had passed out or even died. And, before that happened, the person would say, I have a heart condition, please stop. And yet they would continue until the person didn't respond anymore. And then at that point, they might say, well, we got to stop. He said he had a heart condition. And then the authority figure in the lab coat would say, you got to continue, or the experiment must go on, please continue. And then they would continue to give the electric shock all the way up to the maximum level. Now, think about that in terms of what has been going on in the world over the last couple of years. All of the media play that has gone on to set a specific agenda for everyone to comply with across not just one country, but the entire world. And think about that in light of this Milgram experiment and how people who are normal, compassionate, caring people for each other can start to do things and act in ways that are against their own personal moral code, just because an authority figure is telling them that this is the right thing to do. I leave that with you today. Until the next video, ciao.